This is the moment America lost the Persian Gulf. Not slowly, not through diplomacy, not through sanctions fatigue or political miscalculation, but in one single, coordinated, devastating strike that the most expensive defense system on the planet could not stop. A missile salvo so massive, so fast, and so precisely designed to kill American aircraft carriers that the Navy's own after-action terminology has no existing category for what just happened. If you look at the water east of the Strait of Hormuz right now, you will not see the USS Nimitz. You will see wreckage. You will see fuel burning on open water in a slick that satellite imagery confirms is 3.7 miles long. You will see rescue helicopters from the USS Abraham Lincoln, 40 nautical miles away, racing toward a debris field where, as of 90 minutes ago, 2,200 American sailors were stationed on the most iconic warship in the history of the United States Navy. As of 3:19 a.m. Eastern Time, Monday, April 20th, 2026, the Pentagon has confirmed that the USS Nimitz, America's oldest active nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, a vessel that has sailed every ocean on Earth for 50 years, has been struck by a coordinated Chinese YJ-91 missile launch, executed by Iranian forces from 4 separate coastal positions along the northern Strait of Hormuz. The carrier is not operational. The carrier is sinking. Donald Trump, already in the worst political crisis of his second term, already abandoned by 3 key Senate allies this week, has just received the phone call that every American president since 1945 has dreaded more than any other. The call informing him that an American carrier is going down. In this analysis, we are going to show you exactly how Iran executed this strike, reveal what China's role in this attack actually was, and what it means for the next 72 hours, explain why America's most advanced missile defense systems failed completely, and show you why the Strait of Hormuz, the waterway that powers the world economy, will never look the same again. This is not a crisis. This is a before and after moment in the history of American military power. 8 months ago, the Trump administration made a decision that military historians will debate for decades. In August of last year, senior Pentagon officials presented the president with a classified intelligence assessment. The assessment was clear and alarming. Chinese defense contractors had quietly finalized a technology transfer agreement with Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps. The weapons in question were YJ-91 anti-ship missiles, Mach 2 capable sea-skimming precision systems built on a lineage that began with Soviet engineering and ended with Chinese manufacturing precision. The assessment estimated that Iran had received initial shipments and was building out coastal launch infrastructure at a pace that would give it a credible carrier-killing capability within 6 months. The president reviewed the assessment. He asked 2 questions. The first was whether Iran would actually use the missiles. His intelligence director said yes, under the right conditions. The second question was whether the USS Nimitz's defensive systems, its phalanx close-in weapons, its standard missile battery, its layered electronic countermeasures, could intercept a mass salvo launch. His Navy chief said the systems were designed for engagements of up to 30 incoming threats simultaneously. He was then asked what happens if the number is higher than 30. There was a long silence before the answer came. The answer was classified. The president chose to keep the Nimitz in position. The plan was to use the carrier's presence as a pressure tool, a visible symbol of American resolve that would force Tehran to negotiate seriously. Keeping the Nimitz in the Gulf was supposed to communicate something simple and powerful. America is not afraid of your missiles. The carrier was supposed to be the statement. And for a while, it worked as a bluff. Iran continued negotiations. Diplomats shuttled between Muscat and Washington. Oil markets stayed relatively calm. But Iran was not negotiating in good faith. While its diplomats talked about ceasefire conditions and nuclear transparency, its Revolutionary Guard commanders were positioning mobile YJ-91 launch platforms across 4 coastal sites. They were running timing drills. They were wargaming the exact number of simultaneous launches needed to overwhelm the Nimitz's layered defense. They were studying in meticulous detail the same classified capability gap that the Pentagon had briefed the president on 8 months earlier. Iran gambled that America's pride in its carrier force would prevent Washington from ever truly believing the threat was real enough to withdraw. It gambled that no American president would pull the most famous warship in the world out of a standoff first, because doing so would look like retreat. It gambled that the symbol of American power would become the target of American failure. That gamble paid off completely. At 2:44 a.m. local time, it stopped being a gamble and became history. At 2:44 a.m. Gulf Standard Time on Thursday, every radar system aboard the USS Nimitz simultaneously registered something that the duty officer later described in his emergency transmission as a full horizon threat signature. It did not come from one direction. It came from everywhere. Iranian forces had spent 8 months positioning YJ-91 launch platforms across 4 separate sites: Bandar Abbas to the northwest, Keshem Island to the northeast, Larak Island directly south, and a 4th mobile platform that U.S. intelligence had never identified operating from international waters near the Omani maritime boundary. The launch was not sequential. All 4 sites fired within a 7-second window, sending missiles screaming toward the Nimitz at Mach 2, sea skimming at altitudes below 20 meters to stay beneath the carrier's radar horizon for as long as physically possible. The Nimitz's phalanx systems activated. The Standard Missile Battery fired 17 interceptors in the first 40 seconds. Electronic warfare pods came online and began jamming. For 31 seconds, the defensive response was almost exactly what it was designed to do. Then the numbers broke the math. Pause. The phalanx system is engineered to engage incoming threats at a rate of 4,500 rounds per minute. Against 30 targets, it is devastating. Against a coordinated salvo of the scale Iran launched on Thursday morning, the system ran its intercept calculations and ran out of viable engagement windows before the terminal wave arrived. 3 YJ-91 missiles penetrated the final defensive layer and impacted the Nimitz on her port side. 2 strikes below the flight deck, 1 directly into the forward aircraft elevator shaft. While the Nimitz was absorbing those impacts, something else was also happening 40 nautical miles away. The USS Abraham Lincoln, which immediately activated its own battle stations and turned to provide defensive coverage for its stricken fleet companion, simultaneously registered 8 additional YJ-91 missiles incoming on its own position. A secondary volley that had been held back specifically to prevent the Lincoln from rendering assistance during the critical first minutes of the Nimitz attack. The Lincoln successfully intercepted all 8. But for 11 minutes, she could not move toward the Nimitz without sailing directly into a confirmed missile engagement zone. And while the Lincoln was holding her position under threat, something else was also happening in the global oil market. Within 18 minutes of the first satellite reports leaking through maritime intelligence channels, Brent crude futures spiked 22% in Asian after-hours trading. That is not a correction. That is a market registering the possibility that the Strait of Hormuz, the corridor through which 21 million barrels of oil flow every single day, has just been transformed from a contested waterway into an active war zone with no guarantee of transit for any vessel, military or commercial. By 3:04 a.m., the Nimitz had lost main propulsion. By 3:11 a.m., the order to abandon ship was issued to the carrier's crew of 5,000 sailors and 65 aircraft. By 3:19 a.m., the Pentagon's National Military Command Center received confirmation of what the world would learn within the hour. The United States Navy had just lost a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier in combat for the first time in history. According to 4 sources with direct knowledge of White House communications, the call reached the president at 10:51 p.m. Washington time, 3:21 a.m. Gulf time. 2 minutes after the Pentagon's confirmation, the National Security Advisor was already in the Situation Room. The Secretary of Defense joined by secure video from his residence. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs was physically present, still in his dress uniform from an earlier dinner event. The director of the CIA joined 4 minutes into the call. The president arrived in the Situation Room at 11:03 p.m., 12 minutes after the initial notification. A delay that, according to one source, will be the subject of significant scrutiny in the days ahead. The conversation that followed was not a strategy session. It was a damage assessment wrapped in controlled panic. What do we tell the families? One official asked in the opening minutes, according to a source present in the room. Nobody answered that question immediately because nobody in the room knew yet how many of the Nimitz's crew had successfully abandoned ship and how many had not. The rescue operation was still in its first 15 minutes. The numbers were not in. What was in, immediately, coldly, unavoidably, was the intelligence reading on China's role. Leaked communications reviewed by 3 separate signals, intelligence agencies confirmed that the YJ-91 launch coordinates used by Iranian forces on Thursday morning had been updated with target-specific data that could only have come from a Chinese military satellite pass completed 6 hours before the attack. Beijing did not pull the trigger, but Beijing held the flashlight while Iran aimed. The call from the Chinese Foreign Ministry came 47 minutes after the strike. The message, relayed through the Swiss channel and summarized by sources familiar with the exchange, expressed concern for the safety of American sailors and called for all parties to exercise restraint. It did not mention the satellite data. It did not mention the YJ-91 transfer agreement. It did not mention anything that would connect Beijing to what had just happened in the Strait. The president's response, according to one official in the room, was 4 words. They are not repeatable here. Why did Iran choose this moment? Follow the strategic logic from beginning to end. Iran had been watching American domestic politics for 6 weeks. It had watched 3 Senate Republicans break publicly with the administration over the Gulf deployment strategy. It had watched approval ratings for Trump's handling of the Iran situation fall to 34%, the lowest of his second term. It had watched the Pentagon quietly request emergency supplemental funding for additional phalanx ammunition, a request that was denied by the House Armed Services Committee on the grounds that the administration had not provided sufficient justification for the Gulf posture. Tehran read every one of those signals as confirmation of the same thing. The domestic political support for a sustained American military response was at its lowest point since the crisis began. This was the window. Not because Iran thought it could win a full war with the United States, it never believed that, but because it understood something far more important, that the political cost of a sustained American military response after a carrier loss in this domestic environment with this Congress was a cost this administration could not easily pay. This shifts power in a way that reshapes the entire region. The aircraft carrier is not just a weapon, it is a statement. For 70 years, the statement was, wherever an American carrier goes, America controls. That statement has now been answered. The answer is a missile. And the answer will travel faster than any diplomatic response Washington can offer. The legal exposure is also significant. 3 separate congressional committees announced within 2 hours of the strike that they would be opening formal investigations into what the president knew about Iran's YJ-91 capability gap when he knew it, and why the Nimitz remained in its position after receiving the classified August intelligence assessment. That is not a political skirmish. That is a constitutional accountability process that runs in parallel with a military crisis, and it drains decision-making capacity from the very people who need to be making decisions. Here is how the next 90 days unfold if history follows its own logic. If the United States launches immediate retaliatory strikes on Iranian coastal infrastructure, Iran will activate its remaining YJ-91 platforms against Gulf oil export terminals. If Gulf terminals take significant hits, global oil supply drops by 18 to 22% overnight. If supply drops at that scale, the global recession that economists have been warning about for 18 months arrives not gradually, but instantly, in a single week of market repricing that no central bank has the tools to absorb. We are looking at a chain of consequences that connects a missile strike in the Strait of Hormuz directly to fuel prices, food prices, interest rates, and political stability in countries that have nothing to do with Iran or America's naval posture. Beijing is calculating exactly that chain right now. China imports 40% of its oil through the Strait of Hormuz. A prolonged disruption hurts China economically in the short term. But a United States whose carrier force has been publicly defeated, whose president is facing congressional investigation, and whose Gulf allies are reassessing every security agreement they hold with Washington, that United States is a diminished adversary on every front that actually matters to Beijing's 20-year strategic plan. Where are America's Gulf allies in this moment? Saudi Arabia issued a statement calling for restraint and offering to host emergency talks. That is the diplomatic equivalent of handing someone a tissue during a house fire. The UAE has gone completely silent. Qatar, which hosts the American military command for the entire region, issued a statement expressing condolences for American sailors while simultaneously contacting Iranian foreign ministry officials about what evacuation guarantees look like for the U.S. base on Qatari soil. Reports from 3 separate White House correspondents describe a president who has not slept, who canceled every scheduled public appearance for the next 4 days, who is receiving contradictory advice from a national security team that cannot agree on whether the next move is military, diplomatic, or some combination of both that nobody has actually figured out how to execute. He is a president who chose to keep his most famous ship in harm's way to win a negotiation, and the ship is gone. The USS Nimitz was not just a warship. She was 50 years of American naval identity, compressed into 1,092 feet of steel, nuclear power, and national pride. She was commissioned in 1975. She sailed through the Cold War, through the Gulf War, through September 11th, through 2 Iraq campaigns, through every crisis the modern world produced. And she came home every single time. Generations of American sailors built their careers on her flight deck. She was not supposed to end like this. Donald Trump wanted to use the Nimitz as a symbol of strength. He ended up making her the most powerful argument in the world for the proposition that American military dominance in the Gulf is not permanent, not guaranteed, and not immune to a determined adversary with the right weapons and the right moment. You can project power. You cannot project invincibility. You can position carriers. You cannot position them beyond the reach of physics. And physics says that a Mach 2 sea-skimming missile launched from 4 simultaneous vectors overwhelms any defense system currently deployed on any surface vessel in the American fleet. So where are we right now? The United States has lost its first aircraft carrier in combat since World War II. 3 congressional committees are opening investigations. The Gulf allies are recalculating. China is saying nothing while the world reads its silence. Oil markets have not opened for the regular trading session yet. When they do, analysts expect the most volatile single trading day in energy market history. The Strait of Hormuz, which has been the central nervous system of global oil supply for 40 years, is now a confirmed active combat zone, with no American carrier positioned to enforce freedom of navigation. The Nimitz is gone. The Hormuz balance has shifted. And the question that every government on Earth is asking right now in emergency meetings and encrypted communications that will take days to become public is whether the United States has both the will and the domestic political capacity to respond in a way that restores what was lost on Thursday morning. As we move through the next 72 hours, expect the president to deliver a public address designed to project strength and control that he does not fully possess. Expect retaliatory strike options to be leaked to friendly media as a way of shaping public opinion before any decision is actually made. Expect congressional leaders to demand briefings that the White House will resist providing, and expect Iran to say absolutely nothing publicly while watching every one of those moves with the patience of a government that has been planning this moment for 8 months. The era of unchallenged American carrier dominance in the Persian Gulf is over. What replaces it, whether a negotiated settlement, a full military escalation, or something the world has not yet imagined, will define the next decade of global order. Subscribe and stay close. This story moves by the hour. The moment the retaliatory order comes, or does not come, we go live. The moment the congressional subpoenas are issued, we break it down immediately. The moment Beijing says its first substantive word, we will be here. This is history. Watch it carefully.